Did Jesus teach that he would delay his return for thousands of years? Those who say yes usually point to two parables in Matthew, the parable of the virgins and the parable of the talents. In the parable of the virgins, Jesus said the bridegroom, which represents himself, delayed his return. Likewise, in the parable of the talents, Jesus said the master, which also represents himself, traveled to a far country and returned after a long time. In both of these parables, Jesus implied that he would not return for a long time. Thousands, if not tens of thousands of years, according to some postmillennialists. But is that really what Jesus meant? Thanks for watching this video from the Bible Fulfilled. My name is Alex Polyak, and today I'm going to talk about the timing of the second coming. Specifically, whether or not Jesus taught in the parable of the virgins and in the parable of the talents that he would not return for a long time. If you watched one of my previous videos called The Timing of the Second Coming, and by the way, if you haven't, I have a link in the video notes below, so check that out if you're interested. Anyway, in that video, I focused on 4 statements from Jesus in which he said that he would come again within the lifetimes of the people he was addressing. For example, in Matthew 16:28, Jesus said, "Assuredly I say to you," when he's talking to his disciples in the first century, "Assuredly I say to you, there are some standing here who shall not taste death or die until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." In Matthew 10:23, Jesus told his first century apostles that they would not finish preaching throughout the cities of Israel until the Son of Man came. Keep in mind, the size of Israel is about the size of New Jersey, so that had to have been completed a long time ago. Likewise, in Matthew 24:30-34, Jesus said his disciples would see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And then Jesus said, "Surely I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things happen." And then lastly, in Matthew 26:64, Jesus told Caiaphas, the high priest, and the rest of the Jewish Sanhedrin that they, at least some of them, would still be alive and they would see the Son of Man coming on clouds. So Jesus repeatedly said, all through Matthew that he would come again within the lifetimes of the people he was addressing. Now, some commentators argue that Jesus implied in those 2 parables that I mentioned a second ago that Jesus would not return for a long period of time. For example, in the parable of the wise and foolish virgins, this is in Matthew 25, verses 1-13, Jesus describes 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom, and again, that represents Jesus. 5 of the virgins were foolish and 5 were wise. The foolish ones took their lamps but did not take extra oil with them. The wise ones, however, took both their lamps and extra oil just in case the groom delayed his coming. And as it turned out, the bridegroom took longer than expected, and when he finally came, it was midnight, and the foolish virgins had run out of oil. So they could not go out to meet the bridegroom because they had run out of oil. So the second parable Jesus gives in Matthew 25, verses 14-30, is the parable of the talents. And in this parable, the master, which also represents Jesus, went on a trip to a far country. But before he went on the trip, he gave his servants some talents or some money to invest while he was gone. And the master expected his servants to invest the money wisely. And after a long time, the master returned, and then he either rewarded or punished those servants, based on how they invested the money. So in both of these parables, Jesus implied he would not return for a long time, according to, a lot of commentators. My response is this. Actually, I have a few responses. First, notice that in both parables, the bridegroom and the master returned within the lifetimes of the people he left. In the parable of the virgins, the bridegroom returned while the unprepared virgins were gone purchasing extra oil. So he must have returned, within their lifetimes. And in the parable of the talents, the master returned to the same group of people he had given the talents to, or he had given the money to. And then he rewarded or condemned those people based on how they used the talents. So once again, he returned within their lifetimes. So in both of these parables, Jesus returns within the lifetimes of the people he left. Did the bridegroom delay his return? Yes, but he still returned within the lifetimes of the virgins. Did the master travel to a far country and return after a long time? Yes, but he still returned within the lifetimes of the people he gave the talents to. So this timing fits perfectly with those other 4 statements in Matthew that I just read, in which Jesus said he would come within the lifetime or generation of the people he was addressing. There is not a scintilla of biblical evidence to suggest Jesus was referring to a different coming in the 4 statements in Matthew than in the 2 parables also in Matthew. Jesus certainly never said there was, he was referring to a different coming, and neither did Matthew, by the way, the author of the book. That notion has to be read into the passages, which is eisegesis. Eisegesis means to read one's preconceived views and biases into a passage. Exegesis, on the other hand, means to let the passage speak for itself. And exegetically, there is no biblical reason to think that these are different comings. Had Jesus been referring to a different coming in those 2 parables, than in the other 4 statements, surely Jesus or Matthew, the author of the book, would have said so, yet they didn't. Why? Because it's the same coming. It's the one that happened within the lifetimes of Jesus's audiences. Another point I want to make is this. It was the unrighteous people in Jesus' day, not the righteous people, who expected a prolonged delay to the second coming. In the parable of the evil servant, Jesus called the people who expected him to delay his return, quote, evil servants. You can read that in Matthew 24:48. Paul, too, described these people as, quote, children of darkness. You can read that in 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 3-5. And Peter called these people scoffers. You can read that in 2 Peter 3, verses 3-4. The righteous people, on the other hand, were the ones that were warning that Jesus was coming soon. For example, James said in approximately the year 80-60, he said, establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. That's James 5, verse 8. And at hand means about to happen. It doesn't mean 2,000 years. Likewise, Paul said in around the year 80-60 that the Lord is at hand. This is in Philippians 4, verse 5. John also said, or wrote, I guess is a better word. John wrote in the year 80-65 that Jesus was coming quickly, for the time is at hand. You can read that in Revelation 22, verses 7-10. So again, it was the unrighteous people, in Jesus' day, who said he would delay his return. The righteous people, on the other hand, were saying Jesus was coming soon. Now, it's true that Jesus mentioned a delay in the parable of the virgins, as I just read a second ago. However, by the year 80-60, the writer of Hebrews said that delay was about over. Here's what the writer of Hebrews said, which was probably Paul, according to most commentators, but whatever. The writer of Hebrews said, quote, in just a little while, he who is coming will come and not delay. This is Hebrews 10:36. So Jesus' idea of a delay was 40 years or a generation. Jesus was mercifully given the people of his generation a reasonable amount of time to figure out who he was before he judged them. Here's what Peter said about this. Let's see. Quote, the Lord is not slack concerning the promise of his coming, as some count slackness, but is long-suffering towards us, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. This is 2 Peter 3, verses 9. So Jesus was mercifully given the people of his day, some extra time to figure out who he was before he judged them. Yet this delay would not extend past his generation, as he repeatedly said in those statements I just read in Matthew 16:28 or Matthew 10:23 or Matthew 24:34 or Matthew 26:64. Consider another very telling comparison. Compare what Jesus had said in the year 80-30 regarding the timing of his coming to what Jesus said later regarding the timing of second coming. In AD 30, Jesus said he would come within a generation, right, as I just read in Matthew. Yet 35 or so years later, at the tail end of this generation, Jesus now said through an angel, "Behold, I'm coming quickly, for the time is at hand." What a difference 35 years makes. In AD 30, Jesus said he'd come within a generation or 40 years. By the time Revelation was written in the year AD 65, Jesus said he's coming quickly, for the time is at hand. So the year AD 70 fits perfectly, with this event. Before I conclude this video, I want to go over an objection that many of you are probably thinking, because we've all heard it millions of times, and that is this, that Jesus said in Matthew 24, verse 35, that nobody knows the day and hour of his coming. Even Jesus did not know, the day and hour. And my response is this: while it's true that Jesus did not know the day or hour, he sure knew the generation, because he said so over and over and over. And his disciples knew too. Here's what Paul said in the year AD 50. "Now, brothers and sisters, about times and dates we do not need to write to you, for you know very well that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. While people are saying peace and safety, destruction will come on them suddenly as labor pains on a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. But you, brothers and sisters, are not in the darkness, so that this day should surprise you like a thief. You are all children of the light and children of the day. We do not belong to the night or to the darkness." So while Jesus would come as a thief in the night or unexpectedly to the wicked people, it would not be a surprise to his disciples. They fully expected it. That's why James could say in about the year AD 60, as I just read a few minutes ago, that the coming of the Lord is at hand. James knew it was at hand. Paul, too, said in the year AD 60 that the Lord is at hand. This is Philippians 4, verses 4 to 5. And John, too, wrote that Jesus was coming quickly, for the time is at hand. And he said this in about the year AD 65. So all these passages show that the second coming was not a surprise to the righteous people of the first century. Jesus would come as a thief to the wicked people, but the righteous people fully expected it, because Jesus repeatedly told them when it would happen. He repeatedly said it would happen within a generation, or about 40 years. So as the tail end of that generation drew near, they expected it to happen soon, and that's exactly what they said. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please hit the like button. Also, if you want to be notified of new videos, please hit the subscribe button. Keep an eye out for my book, The End is Here, which will be available summer 2024. I go into much more detail about these end times issues that I've discussed in this video. In the meantime, check out my website, thebiblefulfilled.com. There's a bunch of free articles and videos on there too. Thanks again for watching this video, and I'll see you on the next one.